We Are Atheists is a show brought to you by volunteer atheists from FreeThought Fort Wayne Incorporated. We're looking for members of our audience to call in to tell us what they believe and why they believe it. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. Hello everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of We Are Atheists. Here on We Are Atheists, we want to have a discussion about what you believe, but more importantly, we want to discuss why you believe it. We're your hosts, myself, Caleb Tittman, and John Loftus.
Hi.
Today, we'd actually like to talk about what brought us here. We briefly touched on this on the last episode, but more so John than myself. So I figured I'll probably get the ball rolling on this one.
Okay,
Since
right.
If I recall correctly, I do believe that you said your piece a lot more than I did.
Sure, yeah. You were raised a believer, were you?
Yes, I was. As a matter of fact, I grew up in a split home. My father lived here in Indiana, and I grew up with my mother, who had the vast majority of the custody rights in California. And my mother actually married an evangelical pastor. So my stepfather, I shouldn't say that. He was a pastor. He'd long since been retired. And my entire life, he was the type of individual who would burn the fear of God into my brain. He really beat it into me. But if it makes sense, I don't want to make it seem like he was violent or cruel, at least intentionally cruel with it. It might be difficult for somebody who never grew up in a religious household to understand, but he really did this because he loved me a lot. And after I fell out of my religion, it took me a while to get over that, to be honest. I held a grudge for a long time.
It's an interesting kind of love, isn't it?
It really is.
You're going to hell if you don't believe, and I love you.
Honestly, the one thing that I'd really like to talk about specifically in my upbringing was the trauma that it brought me. For years, well into my adulthood, I was terrified of demons. He was a hellfire and brimstone sort of pastor, one of those. And he really burned this idea of demons, and if you don't do everything bad that happened in my life, it was a demon that did it.
Whoa.
One of those. And he claimed to have actually performed exorcisms in his lifetime. And he would describe these very elaborately. The details, and just, it's almost sci-fi-esque, to put it kindly. For example, there was one time he had said that he was praying for a man who he claimed had a demon in him. And when Jack told me this story, he said that a passerby stopped in his tracks because he'd seen Jack praying over this man. And allegedly, the passerby said that he saw blue flames leaving Jack's hands and surrounding this gentleman. And then Jack claims that the demon then escaped his body and went into a vent.
Into a vent.
Into a vent. And I bring that up because for years, I honestly thought that that's where demons hid out.
In vents.
In vents. Absolutely. And it was something that really scared me.
That's a scary world. I mean, first you have, well, when I die, I could go to hell. And then, but all through your whole life, you have demons that apparently can work their woe in your life. I mean, where are the angels? Where's God? I mean, it's interesting that if God exists and he loves you, then you wouldn't have any worries from demons. You wouldn't have to even think about them because the angels would be there with their sword, and protect you from, them. But no, apparently God wants you to, suffer and be scared and afraid. And he's going to let those demons do whatever they want to do to you because, I don't know, for something that's good for you. Like
teach you those hard lessons.
That's crazy talk. I mean, no father would ever let, wolves in on your, in your bedroom and say, oh, I'm just teaching you a lesson, or I could take care of them, but I'm just gonna let them work their way in your life and tear out your eye or your elbow or something like that. It's like, that's crazy talk.
It's very difficult for outsiders to understand that too. I have some friends, one in particular, who didn't grow up religious at all. And whenever I try to explain some of these sort of details and how I actually believe these things, there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of, what? No way. How could you really believe that? That's so silly. Well, it is silly. Absolutely. When you look at it from the outside in, all of this is nonsense. It's ridiculous. Let me give you an example.
But if you're raised that way, you just don't know any different, and it would take something to cause you to want to doubt that,
Yeah. And my mom had her own version of crazy as well. Not that I'm calling my mom crazy, but when I was living in California, shortly after we had moved out there, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and there was a massive earthquake. One of the big ones. I think it was the earthquake, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, a quake in '99. And this happened pretty early in the morning. It was like 6 or 7, something like that. And I just remember I was sleeping on the bed, and I woke up, and I just grabbed the sides of the bed, and I went for my ride. And I was terrified. And I was, it was scary. It was the first time I'd ever experienced
demons,
anything like that. Got you one better. My mom came bursting through the door. Oh, thank God. Oh, she panicked. Now, at first, I had thought that she was worried for my safety. No, not at all. When she burst through that door, she had a huge sigh of relief, because at that point, in her mind, she knew, okay, this wasn't the rapture. Otherwise, I'd have been gone. She thought that was the rapture happening.
Oh.
So she burst in my door and thought that was the great quake.
Right.
She burst in.
Yeah, rapture hadn't taken place yet because Caleb's still here.
Right? No,
so evidence for that. Right
so here's the order of operations, though. She bursts in. Oh, thank God you're still here. Ooh, are you okay?
Wow. Then you got this rapture thing to worry about. Am I going to go there? Because if I don't, then hell is going to come here on earth, and the devil with his whip and the demons are going to wreak havoc,
Yeah, the revelations, the end of times, the end of days, whatever you want to call it, this was something that was prevalent on both sides of my family. My stepmother, especially, she was really into those Left Behind series. Those got really popular back in the day. And my stepdad and my mom were just constantly thinking that the end was nigh, that any moment now Jesus was coming. You know how many times I heard that?
Plenty. Now I want to say something to the audience. If you don't think this is child abuse, then you've got another thing coming. This whole young man's life was threatened with hell and the angels, and if you didn't do the right things, not be in the rapture. That has got to be the definition of child abuse. Emotional child abuse is still child abuse. Mm-hmm. Verbal child abuse is still abuse. Just apparently wasn't any physical abuse. So it was just this is the kind of thing we want to help people out of by reasoning with their parents. Don't indoctrinate your children. If you want to do something good for your children, let them learn how to think. Let them learn how to question. Let them learn how to follow the evidence wherever it goes. Threatening them, like with a whip or a spanking, or go to your room if you don't believe what I want you to believe. Well, that's child abuse. It seems like to me. I don't know any other way to describe it. So let them grow into their own beliefs gradually. Let them see, and I like to do it this way. I like to tell people, well, why don't you take them around to the various churches and temples and synagogues and FreeThought meetings, and let them see how others raise their kids. Let them see there are people out there with differences of opinion, and look into their eyes and see how sincerely everyone it seems to be. Maybe like shopping for what you want to believe, but they don't do that. No, we've got to indoctrinate them so that they don't go to hell, so that they don't miss the rapture, and so that the demons don't get them. You see, it's just horrific. It's just horrific.
It is, and I actually remember. I don't know how legitimate this is within Christendom, or how seriously they take this amongst all the different denominations, but on both sides of my family, it was believed that if you got left behind during the rapture, not only did that mean that you were a sinful individual unworthy of heaven, but the only way to get into heaven after the rapture was to have your head cut off in some sort of ritual something or other. And this was something that both sides
to be a martyr?
I think so.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that's, in a nutshell, I've never heard them refer to that act as martyrdom. but that makes more sense to me than having to just randomly get your head cut off. But I'm serious. This was just something, and there are two different denominations. My mom was like a First Assembly of Christ type of Christian, which I honestly don't know exactly which denomination that is. But my stepmother and my dad are both Baptists. And this was just something that was just really bizarre to me, but it was something that terrified me, kept me up at night. You know, the idea of hell, the idea of being left behind, and so it was just this constant like evil Santa scenario where instead of just getting coal, you go to hell, or you get left behind. And so you got to be good. You have to be good and follow the rules. Got to be straight edge all the way.
There truly is a counterpart to Santa, and that's Krampus. There's a good movie at Christmas time. Look it up, Krampus. He's the evil counterpart to Satan, or to Santa. I don't know why I said that. And he will do you harm if you've been a bad boy or a bad girl. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, I don't need to get into all the horrific details of my indoctrination. But long story short, I most definitely did have a life of indoctrination growing up. It was there, as far as I know, everybody that I knew and associated with was a Bible-believing Christian. And it wasn't until, honestly, I think it was about 8th grade or so, I was pretty young myself, when I started realizing that I actually did have my own questions and doubts. I was very skeptical about it, and I had always been somewhat skeptical. As I mentioned the last time, I never really believed the really bizarre stories. But by and large, I figured that this had to be true on some level. I remember overhearing my parents have conversations with my other brothers and sisters when they would have doubts, and they would raise their questions. They would be kind enough and generous enough to actually sit down and have that conversation, to their credit, and I would be able to overhear it. So they had some answers for some of these questions, and by and large, their answers were, well, there are certain things that are literal and certain things that aren't. And that's just kind of where I left it. So that's where I remained in my belief zone most of the way through high school. And it was being educated in evolution, which I honestly think sealed the deal in my disbelief in Christianity in particular. I can't explain why, but after coming to realize that in no way, shape, or form did the Bible accurately describe how the earth was created, how life probably arose, all of these things, and that instead they insert their own narrative with their obvious agenda, at that point I said, okay, well, I can at least throw out Genesis. And I realized that if you throw out Genesis, you kind of have to throw all of it out, really.
Domino effect, one after the other of the stories seem to fall.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, I'll bring this up again a little bit later, but this is an excellent book which helped me. Well, when I was still going through my deconversion, I decided to start looking into atheist and secular literature. And I learned about a guy, his name was Dan Barker. I started watching debates and things like this, and I loved his style of debate.
Yeah,
it was
good.
fun. He's a really good debater, and he totes this book all the time. It's a book called Godless. There's a lot of really useful stuff in here. He's got a lot of really difficult to deal with contradictions, challenges, things like that. But the book mainly is his story. And it says it all right here in the subtitle, How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists.
Good book.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. I absolutely loved that. But we'll have to get back to that. We actually have a phone call. All right. Well, anyway, I guess we'll go ahead and continue.
Hi, Robert.
But the reason why I brought that up, though, is because you had said that these sort of things kind of happen in stages. But that's basically how these things happen. He started out, Dan Barker, that is. Man, I'm sorry, guys. We're really struggling with the sound quality here.
We can't stop for it.
Okay, guys. So anyway, in this book, Godless by Dan Barker, he describes his deconversion, and he started out as a fundamentalist. I mean, Bible-believing to the letter Christian.
Yeah.
And he said that he started realizing over time that he was going to have to start throwing this out, throwing that out. He just couldn't bring himself to believe a lot of these things. And eventually this snow rolled into him deconverting altogether. But we'll continue this in a moment. Jack, are you on the line with us?
Robert.
Oh, Robert. Hello, can you talk? Robert?
Yeah, I can talk. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You are on We Are Atheists. Do you have a question for us today?
Yeah, I saw an article in the paper the other day. The Southern Baptist Convention was meeting in Dallas, and they were struggling with the hashtag #MeToo movement because, for one thing, Southern Baptists, as many Christians, have a biblical view of the relationship between men and women. They happen to call their doctrine complementarianism. I looked it up in the dictionary, but it's not there. Anyway, what it tends to mean is that men and women being different, but they complement each other, but they still insist on the superiority of men, both in marriage and in church, and I presume elsewhere. And of course, they said because it's biblical, they have to honor that particular doctrine. So, would you care to comment on that, please?
I'll try. We were having some difficulty hearing you. I might need to ask you again if I answered your question properly. So if you don't mind, if you could stay on the line.
Okay.
If I heard you correctly, it sounds like you're asking us to elaborate on doctrines that kind of put women at second rate. Is that
Correct?
Is that right? Okay. Well, it's your
Well,
area of expertise here.
the complementarian view is nothing but a regurgitated conservative view. They have to throw a bone, to the rest of us in a way and say, you know what, no, we value women too. I mean, after all, Adam did need Eve, and a man does need a wife, and even though she's to obey him, he should love her and not give her the unloving commands. So they're complementary. See, so long as he loves her, his commands will be obeyed easily and lovingly by his wife. That's nothing but a regurgitated conservatism, and it's something to be rejected by all thinking people. It's certainly not the idea that the Bible presents. You mentioned something about the biblical view of women. And the biblical view of women is that they're chattel. I mean, just think about the 10th commandment. Just that one all alone. It says, "Thou shalt not covet thy man's property, his wife, or his slaves." That's the order of development there. First it's his property, and then it's his wife, and then it's his slaves. Of course, slaves are in there. All of a sudden it legitimizes slave itself. So the 10th commandment all by itself treats women as chattel. And yet you can have more than one wife. You can test her for her fidelity by having her drink something, and if she dies or if she becomes sick, that means she's guilty. And it's just you have a mishmash of views in the Old Testament and the New Testament about how to treat women or how to view women, and yet they come up with the right one. Although most of it is just really horrific, I think, and women should reject it. I don't understand why people who are clearly oppressed by a religion have embraced it, like women, or African Americans, or Native Americans don't seem to embrace Christianity too well or too much. But I don't see how an oppressed peoples would ever embrace the religion that has oppressed them, but women have. And I mean, conservative women, they don't know better, and they might as well be like these Muslim ladies who wear these burqas and say, we love it, we love wearing our burqas, and it's freeing and it makes us feel good. So they've got women brainwashed into thinking that they're special because of those sorts of things, and it's just something we should reject in total. I think women are equal, and even more than equal than men.
It's baffled me too, because you can talk to most Christian women, and most of them are willing to actually admit the fact that their Bible tells them that women aren't supposed to hold certain positions of power. Is usually how they phrase it, at least in my circles, the ones that I know. My stepmom, for example, my sister, everyone really, who's on my side of the family, all the women that are religious in my family all say that women simply shouldn't hold certain positions of power. So this has a very real effect in the real world. Take, for example, this last election. There are many women as well who didn't vote for Hillary on the simple fact that, based on the simple fact that she was a woman, and that alone disqualified her.
My mom was one of them, I hate to say. She's 87 years old.
Oh, really?
I mean, no, I don't control my mom. Don't get me wrong. If you think you control anyone, you don't. So don't blame me for that. But she didn't vote for Hillary because she was a woman. I can't believe it. That age, that age group.
You know, my wife and I sort of poke fun at this a bit too, because every once in a while I'll quote, lay down the law, and I'll plead 2 Timothy on her. Every once in a while, like, 2 Timothy says you shouldn't be talking back to me like this.
But, you know, he'd also mentioned the Me Too movement, you know, that women are coming out and saying, you know, we've been abused and for sexual favors, and we've been treated poorly and raped and whatever. Well, you know, the Bible seems to endorse that. I don't understand why. I don't understand people don't understand it. I mean, that's what the Bible says. If you catch them, you can do them. And you know, so why wouldn't that kind of permeate in a Christian culture? And if you have to obey your husband, or if you have to obey men, and you can't have any leadership roles, then what are men going to think that they can do, and what are women, going to tolerate? So it's a Bible culture, you know, not just greed, not just male chauvinist, which that is true too. It probably supersedes anything, but it's a Bible type of a culture that we're facing, I think.
Yeah, and you know, to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what sort of correlation or connection there might be between Bible-believing Christians and this U2 movement. I don't personally see too much of one. The reason why I say that, though, is because I've known people who've participated in this movement who are both religious and not religious, and I don't hear religion being cited as a rhyme or a reason for any of this, for their participation or anything that they're saying within that activism itself. So that's, yeah, I guess that's where I'll just leave that. Did we answer your question, Bob? Do you have anything else for us?
Do you want us to comment? I think we've commented.
No, you did very well. I appreciate that. I think the fact that the hashtag #MeToo movement is going on is really dealing with the actual horrors that are happening to women.
Hey, Bob, I'm gonna have to interrupt you real quick. Are you on speakerphone?
That's probably what it is.
No.
No? Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt you then.
Getting some sort of feedback?
Yes, I apologize. But go ahead and continue. I apologize.
Okay, well, anyway, it would seem that the horrors that are being inflicted on women that have been highlighted, and the reaction to it is also a direct result of this type of attitude. And the new president of the Southern Baptist Convention also was quoted as saying, since it's biblical, they have to honor it, which pretty much just tends to illustrate that if there is a belief and a doctrine, it tends to stop thinking about it. So that's the only comment I have to say.
Excellent.
So thanks again, guys. Appreciate it. It's a great show. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate the phone call. Okay. Well, to continue where we left off, before Bob had called, we were discussing how small steps can lead someone to snowball through their deconversion process. In Dan Barker's case, he ended up finding that as time went on, as he started looking more and more into his religion, that his own personal beliefs, his own personal version of Christianity started becoming more and more liberal, until it got to the point where he asked himself the question, well, if all of this can be metaphorical or allegorical or whatever, maybe God is metaphorical or allegorical or whatever. And so that was one of the final straws in his own deconversion. Now, I bring this up because I don't think that there's been any atheist I've ever come in contact with who had any one moment where they just had somebody basically slap them in the face or some information come to them that just made them on a dime go from theist to atheist. My deconversion process was extremely lengthy. It took, well, I shouldn't say extremely. I'm sure there are some that take decades. Mine didn't take decades. Mine took about 2 or 3 years-ish. So as soon as I was out on my own and I finally got a place of my own, I wanted to get into, this is going to sound kind of silly, ghost hunting. That's the niche that I had found. I had my questions, I had my doubts. I wanted to learn more about this mysticism, this spirituality. You know, I wasn't just going to take people at their word for any of this stuff anymore either. I wanted to, I'm serious.
You were going to go catch your one.
I was going to go out there and find that for myself. I needed that evidence, and if it existed, I was going to go out there and find it. I was determined. I spent years doing this. I joined a group where we actually traveled the tri-state area. People would call us up, tell us, hey, our house is haunted, we have a demon here, whatever the case may be.
Cool.
And we'd go there and do our investigations. And for the first year and a half or so of me doing this, I fell more and more and more in love with it. I was eating more of it up. I didn't question it enough, obviously. And what really did it for me is, well, I shouldn't say that. What really sparked my deconversion even faster, to get that anyway, was there was a guy in our group who was sitting there next to one of these EVP or EMF detectors, excuse me. EMF detector is a device that's supposed to somehow detect the amount of electromagnetic energy in the air, because allegedly ghosts either generate and or can communicate through the electromagnetic spectrum through this device. So in theory, if this was an EMF detector and a ghost wanted to communicate, it would just have to wave its ethereal equivalent of a hand through it and it would make it beep or whatever. And we were sitting there, he was getting bored, and he was looking at this, and he says, man, this is all we ever get. I never see somebody get lifted off the ground. I never see pictures and crap flying off the walls. You know, I never see a ghost. I don't feel anything. It's like, I just, none of this is convincing me anymore. Just in the middle of an investigation, he said that, and I was like, well, I mean, that's why we're doing this, though, right? To collect these little bits, because it's not going to hit us in the face. I mean, if it was obvious, we wouldn't be doing this, because this would already be a science, right? Wait a minute. It would already be a science. What am I doing? If this isn't science, what am I doing? I thought I was doing science. I mean, I did a lot of research into this. There were a lot of paranormal researchers and scientists out there inventing all kinds of crazy gizmos and gadgets to try and detect ghosts and find ghosts and coming up with elaborate theories. And when you want to believe, and I did want to believe myself, probably should have mentioned that, but I did want to believe. There was something in me that really just cried out for this. I really did want it to be true. I wanted it to be real. Mostly because the idea of nothingness, the nihilism scared me.
Now, did you buy the deluxe EMF? Is that what the EMF? Or
we had,
for $49.99, or did you buy the top of the line EMF?
We went straight to the top.
Oh, and how much was that?
I didn't buy the EMF detector. I bought some mics and some software. I was the EMF, or is that right? Hold on. EVP, excuse me. I was the EVP specialist. It's been about a decade since.
Follow the money. Follow the money. I mean, somebody's making money off that device, right? And so you know, it just seems maybe you can get by it cheaper, like you did, but. No wonder you're going to propagate something like that if you're selling the devices.
Well, you know, and to be fair, the reason why I started doing this in the first place, though, before I ever got into the actual investigations and all that, I had already convinced myself that Christianity most likely wasn't real at this point, but that there had to be something. I was convinced.
Oh, okay.
And right after I had moved into this duplex, I kept hearing footsteps in the living room. I was sleeping I heard footsteps in the dining room, and I was sleeping in the living room at the time. I was doing construction on the bedroom. And I kid you not, this is true. Every time I would look around the corner to see where those footsteps were coming from or what they might be, it would stop. And it's in my mind, I thought, this only happens when I poke around the corner. So surely there's some intelligence causing this to happen.
Sure.
And that was the first, quote, paranormal experience that I ever had. It was uncanny. It was creepy. Really, really was. And that sort of thing happened all the time while I was living there. I was convinced that the house was haunted, and a couple of friends of mine decided, as an amateur group, to do an EVP session, which is simply taking an electronic recorder and putting it in the center somewhere on a table and just talking to the air. And the idea being, hopefully something will talk back and you'll be able to hear it after you just play back the recording. And when we did that, we caught some really great stuff. I mean, it was fantastic stuff. Oh, it's stuff that it sent shivers down my spine, man. There was a moment where we actually captured, I need to start using more air quotes. We actually captured an electronic voice phenomenon of somebody hearing my buddy Matthew speak in the distance and going, "Hey, is that you, Doug?" It's what it sounded like. Now, when I played back that recording and I listened to it a couple times, Matthew and I were the first ones to listen to it, right? And we both claimed to have heard the same thing. Now, there's a phenomenon, which is one of the reasons why I got out of this after I learned about this phenomenon, called pareidolia, which is the tendency for people to see faces in things that don't actually have faces, or it's also been known to cause people to hear things that aren't actually there. It tends to personify things, in a nutshell. And what this effect does is human beings are pattern recognizing machines. That's what we do. Everywhere, every aspect of our life is controlled by our capacity to recognize patterns and react accordingly.
Faces on the moon. Yeah. I mean, the man on the moon and canals in Mars.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean or even a face on Mars. You know,
yeah, the face on Mars. That's a great example. When you actually look at it, it's not a face, but if you looked at the original photo that everyone thought looked like a face, you'd see a face. Very few people on the planet wouldn't actually see a face there. But obviously, we found out that there wasn't a real face. This is just an illusion. And that's important. In other words, all of these cases, these instances of people seeing faces here or hearing voices there, it's almost, I'm going to go ahead and say it, it's an illusion.
Jesus on a potato chip.
Yes.
I want to find one of those.
I'll bet you can still find one.
Every time I open a bag of chips, I'm looking. I want to see
okay.
Jesus or a Mary. Put it on your eBay.
I think I'd settle for like a cross-shaped chip.
I wouldn't have to say I believed it. I would just say, doesn't this look like? And then, you know.
Somebody will fill in the gap right there. Doesn't this look like? Yes, that does look just like Elvis.
10,000, 20,000.
Somebody's convinced of it. Something crazy. So, but anyway, I had asked my wife, at the time my fiance, to listen to it, but we didn't tell her what it was because I was trying to be scientific, you see. And I wanted to see if she heard the same thing.
Yeah.
Naturally, she did. So we started doing some investigating, and we ended up realizing that somebody did actually die in that house. One of the tenants that had lived there for almost 30 years, in fact, died on the porch. He was so large that he actually asphyxiated. He fell asleep on the patio with his feet up, and he suffocated under his own weight. But anyway, the neighbors knew him very well. Neighbors are lifers in that duplex, and so they'd been there for probably 40 years, something like that. So I talked to them. I asked them if they knew Chuck, the guy who died there, and they're like, yeah, I knew Chuck. And I asked them if they knew him and his friends, yada, yada. Anyway, I had this guy come over to our house and listen to this tape, and it blew him away. He took a step back, put his hand on his heart, and said, "Oh my goodness, where did you get this?" I said, "Well, we just did this the other day." He says, "That sounds exactly like Chuck saying, hey, is that you, Doug?" His best friend, Doug, they used to come over on the weekends, go down to the basement, play darts until the sun went up, and then go out fishing. That was their routine. And we did happen to do this on a Friday night. So when you put all this together, and you put all the pieces in, as far as I was concerned, I found legitimate evidence of the afterlife. Really, I was convinced. But again, you have to actually dig in to the finer details here. No one data that I was able to provide was in and of itself worthy of being called actual data. There's a material, natural explanation for each individual piece of data. And spare one or two maybe. It doesn't matter, even if we can't solve for a couple of these problems. Point is there are natural explanations for everything that happened to us. As I mentioned, hearing voices and hearing what you want to hear, even if you guys hear similar things, if you scratch, you can do this at home. You can take any electronic recorder and just make squishy noises, walk around, and eventually you're going to hear a voice say something. And if you believe or are wanting to hear something in particular, chances are that's what you're going to hear.
Well, I don't know about anybody else's experience, you know, but I've never been approached by a ghost, you know, and you know, nothing in my life. I mean, you'd think that if there are ghosts and they want to like communicate to me, they should be able to do it. And I don't understand why ghosts are locked into a house or a cemetery.
Boggled me.
You know, or in Angola, Indiana, where I lived for a while, there's a theater, a movie theater, and upstairs they say there's a ghost. So I was, you know, walking around at night, and there's these ghost hunters. They're set up with cameras, and they're going to see a ghost up there. And I thought that was kind of funny. I never found out whether they did or they didn't. But why are they locked up above the theater? And why don't they just, if they're supposed to be invisible, why don't they just fall through the ground? Why are they always walking? And why are they always wearing the clothes you last saw them wear?
Yeah.
I mean, the people who claim, oh, I saw these ghosts. Well, what they look like? Well, they look like Grandpa did just before he died. Why didn't they look younger? Why didn't they look older? You know, and why are they wearing those clothes? It's because, well, you know, I don't know, just because. So none of those things make sense to me.
Yeah.
See, none of those things. You know.
I'm of the opinion that the concept of a soul in general is one of the most mute topics.
Yeah, and you got to have a soul too. Like,
yeah.
I ask people, where is it? Is it my knee? And they can't see anything. Is it on my knee? Am I wearing it on my sleeve? You know, on my arm? Well, where is it? You know, and if the soul's different from the body, then can I just go put it right here for a second? You know, I'm going to talk to it for a little bit. Well, but I can't talk without my soul. Right? They say, but how can the soul actually do anything with my body? I mean, it's supposed to be an immaterial substance, and my body is material. So how can they make contact and actually move my jaw or do anything? None of that makes any sense. The best evidence is that there is no soul.
That's pretty much what convinced me after going through this lengthy process of going through my deconversion to the extent to where I was no longer Christian, to becoming a ghost hunter. And then coming out of my ghost huntingness, I'll call it mysticism, spiritualism, whatever you want to call it. I'll call it spiritualism. What ended up getting me out of my spiritualism, the first step, I like to, when I tell this story in passing, I usually just refer straight to the atheist experience, Matt Dillahunty. But it was the first thing that really got me to truly question the idea of ghosts even being a possibility was, I think it was a Showtime or maybe HBO series that Penn and Teller had. It was, I can't say the word, but it's the naughty version of BS, bullcrap. And that was a fantastic show. And I didn't specifically tune into this episode. The show ran for several seasons, and eventually they had an episode on ghosts, how ghosts are bullcrap. And I saw that, and I couldn't really refute what they had said, but I was still pretty convinced. So that's what really steamrolled my deconversion. That's when I was like, okay, if this isn't legit, how can I find out? How do I figure out what's going on here? I don't know. I don't have the tools to figure out what to do from here. So I just started reaching out, and eventually I thought, okay, maybe atheism? Let's give it a shot. Let's look into it. So I looked into the atheist experience, and then Matt Dillahunty really conveyed skepticism in such a beautiful way, his articulate way of doing it, and it's a way that really connected, and everything that he said just made perfect sense. And I've told this story before, and I'll just shorthand it. I happened to tune into the perfect episode. They talked about all the big questions that I wanted to ask, and I got my answers. And they were short and succinct, very clear, straight to the point, no BS answers that Matt Dillahunty is able to deliver on. And at that point, I'm not going to say I was an atheist, but after about 2 or 3 months of watching this show, watching more debates, learning more and more about skepticism, learning more about the humanism, learning more about humanism in general really helped to open my eyes too, because and one of the things that really held me to the afterlife was I was also one of those people who thought that if you don't have a belief in something, surely you can't ground your morality anywhere. That was the last final thread that really tied me to anything remotely spiritual. I'd honestly dropped the idea that okay, maybe we don't have souls that linger this earth, but maybe they go off to the hereafter. Maybe that's why there's no evidence of it. But even still, I don't know how I could say anything matters if there is no afterlife. So that was really the final little thread there that I had to get over. That was my final hurdle.
It may not matter in a million years that we existed, or it may not matter that we did anything because we'll be forgotten, but it does matter to the people who are here now. And that's the bottom line. It does matter now to the people who love us and whom we love. So that if that doesn't motivate us to care for others, then you've got a sick mind anyway, and maybe you should continue believing in God, because I don't want you on the streets without it. or maybe I do, or maybe I don't, because maybe God's voice might tell you to go kill your kids. So I don't know. That's a double-edged sword. It's best just to care for people because you're a caring person, just like you would care for your immediate family and an extended family and an extended family from beyond that, and your social groupings beyond that. It just goes on and on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I noticed that in your story, by the way, deconversion, for some of you readers or listeners, is you have a conversion experience where you convert, and the deconversion is to convert away or to change your mind.
Yes.
But I noticed that you had two types of influences, if I, well, maybe three. You had a book, Dan Barker. You were a reader. That's good, because I've edited a few books. I've written a few books. I'm glad to know there are still readers out there.
Not a heavy reader, but
Thank
I do
you. So,
read.
not a heavy reader, obviously. I mean, because you're most of what changed your mind were videos and podcasts, which are wonderful. They're changing the lives of young people in today. They just really are. So those of you who are putting those things out, it does matter. And then your experiences. You thought like a scientist. I tell people you have to start thinking like a scientist. You wanted to catch ghosts. That is so funny. You really believed
I wanted to do it scientifically.
I know. And then you realize that's not science.
It's not.
I mean, because you're paying money for some kind of a reader that doesn't show you anything but whatever. Electronic.
It was learning this word. I'm gonna. If you don't know this word, I'm gonna teach it to you now. Demonstrable. That word changed my world. Again, I'm going to give Matt Dillahunty the credit on this. He's the first person who ever said it that I ever paid attention to, at the very least, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, it's the first time I ever heard the word. If you can't show, and even in a hypothetical sense, how whatever it is that you believe could be wrong, then you shouldn't even be putting it forth as an idea, period. And one thing that I ended up realizing was that in order for something to be demonstrable, you have to be able to show that it's true. That's what the word means. You have to be able to prove it. You have to show somebody somehow, some way, that it is actually the case. The thing with ghost hunting is that nothing that you do is repeatable. Now, you can get similar results in similar situations, but you cannot create a set of conditions in one set that are identical with the set of conditions in another. You just can't. It just can't be done. And at least not that I've seen. If you can do that, please do. I'd be very interested if somebody could find a demonstrable way to show that ghosts are real. That'd be fantastic. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, there's just no method of doing that. And again, with my skepticism and falling out of it, just realizing that all of this science is bunk. It's just nonsense. And it's, like you had said, there are a handful of people that like to take advantage of this sort of spiritualism. I think by and large, most of the people that are involved in these sort of projects...
self-deceived.
Yes.
I mean, they're just as deceived as the ones they deceive, just like I think believers are. There are some who are hucksters and liars, like you had just said, but most probably believe it's crazy. I wonder, even though you thought there were demons out there to inflict pain on you and cause you to doubt, it would seem to me extremely difficult to want to doubt, because you would be saying to yourself, I don't believe God, I mean, and the demons, I could just hear you think to yourself of listening to him say, yeah, we're getting him now because he's questioning, right? Extremely hard to come out of something like that.
Yeah, this whole mentality, and one of the mechanisms that help to propel this mentality is, for example, the notion that it's a popular phrase. I don't think it's actually in the Bible. It could be wrong, but this notion that the greatest trick the devil ever did was to convince the world that he didn't exist. That sort of language is what I grew up with. So anytime I had doubts, I could always just refer back to that. Like, oh, well, it's just the devil convincing me he's not real. And, you know, even once I started to not believe in the devil, I had a really hard time. I heard it phrased really well, and I don't remember where I heard this, but there's an analogy that I'm going to put forth here. It's the idea that there's no afterlife terrified me. That was the scariest notion in the world to me. And not only that, but I really felt like if there was no afterlife, that's like I felt like I was being robbed. Like it was just this crushing notion, truly. And I heard an analogy that went like this. It said that it's almost like somebody had convinced you that you had $1 million in the bank, but you couldn't touch it until a certain point, like say 18. And then you turn 18 and you realize that it was all bupkis, that you didn't ever have $1 million in there, nobody had ever done that. In fact, it was a practical joke. Nothing was stolen from you. You're not missing anything. It's just that huge amount of disappointment, that the fact that if you had the idea that you were going to be getting $1 million when you were 18, you'd probably have very different spending habits or different plans for the future.
Sure.
I'd plan on going to Harvard or something if I knew I had $1 million. That's why I didn't plan on going to Harvard, because I knew I didn't have that kind of cash. But if I knew that I was going to be in that sort of situation, yeah, I would plan accordingly. But then to find out at the end that it was all smoke and mirrors, it's a crushing feeling. And I'll admit, for myself, I had one good night where I pretty much cried myself to sleep. And, you know, I spent half the night going in and out of this terrified, oh, I'm going to just not exist one day, to, okay, well, it's not that bad. It's just, it sucks. Like, that was my mentality at the time. And it took me a while to really find, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, and this is one of the reasons why I hope that somebody wants to call in and talk about Jordan Peterson's notions again. But this idea that we ought to chastise or fear or neglect our ultimate nihilism is it's just backward thinking. You can't avoid it. You have to deal with it. At least if you're a non-believer like us. You know, at some point, I think that I'm going to cease to be. So where do you find joy in that, right? That's where the Christians are going to come in. Well, how could you possibly find joy or fulfillment in that?
You never remembered before you were born.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it.
Because you didn't exist. I mean, you never remember those experiences. You didn't have any, so you'll never remember the past, the future experiences either. I tell people that they say, "When are you going to go? Where are you going to go when you die?" I say, "Well, I'm going to go to the same place that dogs and cats and elephants go." and so they'll ask them, where do they go? And they might say, well, they go to heaven. Well, how about rats and mosquitoes and parasites, all kinds of parasites? I'll start describing them. Oh, no, they're not in heaven. Well, how do you differentiate? And they can't find a way to differentiate between those. And I'll say, well, if all those creatures go to heaven, then it kind of look like it is now. How do you like life? I mean, is it heaven to you? Well, no, it's not exactly heaven. I mean, we got some torture and pain. So I just say I go to the same place they go. Of course, you had mentioned evolution as being a factor in your deconversion. Absolutely. So with evolution, we are descendants of previous ancestors, all the way back. So if they died, we're going to die. And if they no longer exist, we're no longer going to exist. And you just have to just say, okay, that's it. Well,
and another thing that I'd like to bring up about this fear of nihilism, I think that this is really one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people, is this fear of a nihilistic outlook. To understand what I'm saying here, that just because you ultimately believe that it's all going to end one day, that the lights are going to shut off and they're not going to turn back on, that doesn't mean that your life is void of meaning, that your life is void of tranquility or transcendence even. Things like love, things like passion, all the great things in life are still available to you. Absolutely. That nothing has changed, aside from the fact that I now believe that I'm just going to stop ticking at some point. But I actually learned how to find a sort of liberation in this. It suddenly dawned on me one day that if there is no God, then there is no plan. So none of this is happening for a real purpose, like an ultimate purpose. Well, that means I get to make my own purpose.
Exactly.
It was this weird epiphany that I had, and nobody had ever brought that to my attention. It was just this, I can. Well, if it's not up to anybody else, and it's up to me. Fate, the idea of fate I never questioned it. Destiny, fate, purpose, all of these things are really tied together, and I felt liberated once I realized that I'm no longer tied down to some notion that, well, maybe I am going to be nobody, but maybe that's ultimately my destiny, or maybe I am going to be somebody, whatever the case may be. But when you're not going to, I apologize, we're going to interrupt because we're actually almost out of time. We have less than 10 minutes in the show and we have a caller.
Oh, no, you don't. I don't. No.
Oh, we don't. Did we lose the caller, or? No? Okay, well, I apologize for that. Never mind. Do you happen to remember the last 3 words that came out of my mouth? Because I saw the phone call and I got really excited.
I was thinking about what I was going to say next.
Say it. Let's hear it.
No, people say, well, you're going to know when you die, that you were wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to say, no, unfortunately, I won't know that I'm right when I die, because in order for that to happen, I have to wake up to know that I was right or wrong. And you won't know that you were wrong and you spent your whole life on a delusion. I wish you could know that, because it'd be kind of nice to know, but you will not ever know that you were right or wrong.
Sure. So let's go ahead and tie the bow here in our last couple of minutes. What led me here? I guess I wasted most of the show today. I apologize.
It's yours. Take it.
But maybe we'll get to why you're here on another episode. But anyway, so after I'd fallen in love with the atheist experience, I started falling in love with debate. I started falling in love with the idea of actually educating myself. Nobody had encouraged any of these things in me, truly, growing up. I mean, I was encouraged to keep my grades straight, but that's about the extent of it. Follow the good book and keep your grades good, and you'll be all right in the grand scheme of things. That's kind of the laissez-faire mentality I had as far as my education is concerned. And I started watching podcasts, and I started listening to them and listening to radio shows, and I even started doing the same for Christian podcasts, Catholic podcasts, Catholic radio shows. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could so that I'd be able to present this information to other people. And then I realized that, well, if I'm going to do that, maybe I could do it in a podcast format, or perhaps on the radio, or whatever the case may be. And I remember I was having a discussion at a FreeThought meeting. Excuse me. We'll fast forward a bit because we're running short on time, but after I dropped the ghost hunting, I started looking for secular alternatives for something to do with my time, right? I wanted to get out there and do something. I'm the type of person, I'm motivated. I want to get out there and change the world for the better. I want to leave it better than I found it. That's just how I am. I can't really give you a rhyme or reason why. That's just the type of person that I am. That's the best I can describe it. So I guess in describing my passions and what I wanted to do, it encouraged a fellow member to walk up to me and ask, hey, would you want to join our radio show? We could definitely use another host. And you seem like a nice talkative fellow. Sure, I'd love to. And so I started doing this radio show called the Who's Your Humanist Hour. I'm not entirely sure what they're going to be doing with that show in the future. I think that they're actually going to be having it in a bi-weekly format, and I don't think they're going to be on the radio. I think they're switching to a podcast format. But I ran this program for about 1.5 years or so, and it was a radio show program right here on WELT 95.7, and we would just discuss atheist issues, humanist issues, politics, science. We'd cover any topic. I'd usually open the excuse me, I apologize, I'm a little burpy. I'd usually open the show with something to the extent of this is a show dedicated to discussions about all things humanism, or anything that might somehow relate to humanism in any way, shape, or form. So we'd loosely cover all sorts of different topics, and I started falling in love with this idea of educating and being asked questions and asking questions and learning more and putting the information out there as best as I possibly could, again, to try and leave the world better than what I found it. And eventually I got approached by our president, and he asked us, would you guys be interested in doing a television show program? very similar to what you do on the radio, just why don't you do it on TV instead? And I said, that'd be fun. That'd be really cool. Let's do it. So I did. And here we are. Now, that process itself took a while. There's a lot of research involved in getting a lot of this stuff started. Initially, I wasn't even sure if we were going to do this in the public access studio. I actually drove down to Austin, Texas to speak with the Atheist Experience crew and get some firsthand knowledge from these people. By the way, highly recommend a visit. I can't say that. By the way, if you're ever in Austin, they'd love to have you in on the Atheist Experience show. They rolled out the red carpet for me when I told them that, I'm thinking about starting up my own show, very similar to this one, yada yada. They gave me a private tour of the facility. They showed me exactly what everything does. I got a couple of pictures in there. It was fun. It was a blast. So they're wonderful people down there, and they've helped other programs like our own, get started elsewhere. In fact, before I approached them, they just got done helping a crew in Poland get a live call-in show started up for them.
That's
and
great.
They were able
Wonderful.
to do it
Fantastic.
for minimal costs. But anyway, so I'm here because I think that this is a format that's really going to interest a lot more of the younger people. I think that that's what's most important long term, is to try and attract the young folks. Ideally, I'm hoping that we can have callers and viewers anywhere from the the 15 to about the 45 range. Those are the people that I think are still susceptible to change, really. I mean, anyone at past 45, I'm not going to say that they're too stubborn or whatever. But
older people that we never change our minds about anything.
It's difficult to teach the old dogs new tricks, if you catch my drift. But not to say it's impossible. It's definitely worth trying.
No,
sure.
there's actually something to that. I mean, you're set in your ways, sure.
Yeah. I can't think. I'm stuttering now because of it. But anyway, we have about 3 minutes left in the show, and since I guess this is the Caleb show,
Yeah.
I was wondering, did you happen to have any questions for me or anything like that?
I've been commenting along the way. I mean, I think you talked about science being important. Books, good for you. I've done a bunch of those podcasts. And experiences, and you faced your fears with the afterlife and what to do with that, and it's amazing to see that you came out of the fear of like demons and missing the rapture and going to hell and to be able to doubt through that, and he's a rare breed. I'm telling you, people don't usually think their way out of religion. I mean, most of us continue believing in what we were raised to believe. I thought my way out of it as well. It's really hard to face reality and say, you know what, I was born into a religion, now let me ask whether there's any reason to continue believing it, and to go wherever the evidence leads, even if it hurts, even if it's scary, even if it's fearful, to do.
Yeah. Fear, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody, but whenever I hear somebody talk about their deconversion story, generally fear is the most difficult thing. It's a very broad thing, however, so that's why I mention it now and not at the onset, because it's such a broad topic, because there's so many things to fear. The fear of hell, the fear of not going to heaven, because there's also this idea of abolishment, or whatever it's called, where you just cease to exist.
Oh, right,
Annihilation. Thank you. That was also, I kind of went back and forth on that.
He's gone.
Yeah, there's just so many different things.
I like that. If there's a hell, poof, I'm gone.
I don't know. I want to ask you this: did you ever? We only have a minute left, so we got to be very, very brief. But I want to ask you: when you were a believer, did you ever have a notion that there were demons around you? Like, I'm trying to see if you can understand, because I had that notion frequently. I had a traumatic couple of events happen to me in my childhood, which I'm not going to discuss, but I actually ended up making this sort of connection with that and demons in my brain. So there was it's actually kind of hard to talk about, but there was a large chunk of my life where I really thought that I was in the room with demons, and I could feel them. Like, I could actually feel their presence. And it's such a cold, terrifying feeling. I just don't know. Have you ever had anything
Yeah,
remotely close to that?
I was Pentecostal, and we believed in demons, and we had to say, "Get behind me, Satan," and stuff like that. I just grew out of that. As a Christian, I come to believe that God is more powerful than any demon, so I didn't worry about it after that.
Yeah. Well, that's the credits rolling by, guys. That was a great show. Well, thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah,
We are atheists, and we'll see you next time.